Well, this is pretty good timing, right? So we've just done a video on legendaries, and then we did a video on generics and what I deem is the biggest bottleneck for Flesh and Blood, especially going into the future. And it seems that this issue is very much at the forefront of Flesh and Blood at the moment. And the issue being, what is the biggest barrier for competitive play? So this was raised on the Flesh and Blood Reddit, right, and is cited the staples as probably the biggest issue, which then ties into this article, which also states the staples, which was based on this video, which again examines the core staples being Command & Conquer, Barondel Spring Tunic, and the Crown of Providence, which I completely missed as I was still under the mentality that Enlightened Strike still saw a lot of play. Either way, it's should serve as a decent way to round out our discussions, right? Because I've gotten a lot of feedback from a lot of you on both sides of the coin that, yes, the staples are a big barrier, and then on the side of things, you don't need those staples to win. And I think we can come to a fairly decent conclusion about it all. Starting off, this video suffers from probably the same objectivity as myself, right? So this is using what I would assume would be the first place decks for a lot of these heroes. I don't think they cite where they got them from. No, I just rewatched it quickly. But that was the same sort of issue I did. I only glossed over the most recent and the highest placing decks as an example for, again, the upper limits, if you will, of cost. Now, in saying that, I am happy to admit I am half wrong. Okay? Yes, staples are great, but they are not a necessity. Well, sort of. So I think the biggest issue is no one wants to admit that it's a bit of both. Okay? The staples are just as necessary as the appropriate skill to play Flesh and Blood. Because I think this is what really has attracted people to Flesh and Blood, is it is a whole another beast when it comes to gameplay. Okay, the amount of strategy needed and the amount of skill to actually use your constructed deck efficiently and effectively is what really separates a lot of players. Now, in saying that, if you had mastered the skill, or you had even a relative amount of skill to your opponent, then having the better cards, having a Spring Tunic, having Command & Conquer, having the best legendary equipment for your specific class, hero, however you want to refer to it, is going to net you the win. Okay, you're going to edge out your opponent simply because your deck is more efficient. So if you can both use all your tools to their fullest capacity, well then your tools are better, so they're going to beat your opponent. And this sentiment is pretty reflected in the responses that this post on Reddit have received so far. So I think my biggest barrier to entry is how often I get told you don't need the big expensive staples to compete right before getting creamed by said staples. And then the response to that, I'm relatively new to the game, picked up most of the big staples, and then they still lose, right? Because I'm bad at the game. So I agree and disagree with this, which is essentially the stance I'm now taking. Skill is massive and people overlook it, but equally, not having your legendary class equipment is crippling to your actual class. A reasonable player can easily add 20% to their win rate by owning the correct armor versus using common stuff. So not only does that mentality really ring true, you then have the issue of when you present a player with this idea that they should learn the skill behind the game first, to then beat them with the cards that they value so highly, well, you're reinforcing to them that yes, skill does matter, but at the same time, so do the cards. It's hard to get across this message that you need skill when what any new player really sees is these cards being auto-included into the majority of decks. Again, I will use majority because it has been pointed out to me that, say, for instance, Dash runs Teklo Foundry Heart, and then Guardian likes Tectonic Plating, and Assassin Red Back Shroud. Did I get that right? Fairly new, not familiar with it yet. But in saying that, how much does that really shave off of the cost of a deck? If we go off the deck used on the video, Dash is 380. If we go off the Dash reference in the article, it's around 200. That's still a pretty high price point to get a working competitive deck, especially for a new player who's unfamiliar with the game. Okay, the majority of people, when they enter a game, they'd probably, pick up a box Well, I assume everything here is going off US prices, so that's equivalent to them picking up 2 to 3 boxes of Flesh and Blood. And then not only that, but you have the argument of whether or not they even want to play those heroes. Do they want to play Dash? Do they want to play Katsu? That's the other cheap deck reference in this article. Because again, playstyle of each hero is probably one of the biggest draws, right? You find the hero you identify with, and then you go from there. So using this idea that, yes, there are cheap heroes, is in itself not a great argument. If someone wants to play X hero, well, they want to play X hero with the most competitive version or a highly competitive version of said hero. Simply presenting to them, well, you don't want to spend so much, swap to this hero, isn't always going to fix the situation. Yes, there will be people out there who simply want to play for the sake of being competitive, and to that, then you can substitute any deck with a cheaper competitive hero. But there will be players out there who have identified with said hero and want to learn how to be most successful with that hero. And with that comes, in most cases, a hefty price tag. Skill alone won't win you every game, nor will having the correct or the best equipment and cards for any hero. In saying that though, I think something that is missed by a lot of new players or people getting other people into the game is just how nuanced Flesh and Blood really is. Compared to a lot of other TCGs, Flesh and Blood is on a different level. It's a whole different type of beast when it comes to actually playing. It's akin to, well, chess is probably the best example to me, or I think I actually saw a video comparing it to, say, Street Fighter, and not Street Fighter in the button mashing sense, but the actual skilled sense. So while skill is a big factor in Flesh and Blood, I don't think a lot of new players understand exactly what it means to master said skill, because there are a lot of different factors that go into playing a deck effectively, right? There is your correct resource use, and then also being able to push and pressure your opponent, as well as defend and react. And from that, it spawns this sentiment that if anyone is coming to the game and worried about the price tag, the best thing to say to them is, well, work on actually playing the game, get better at the game. But that in itself is counter to the actual perception of seeing Flesh and Blood played, right? Flesh and Blood, think of it as boxing, if you will. So if you were to, say, watch a high competitive level match, there are going to be a lot of nuances that go over your head. Even someone with a relatively good understanding of Flesh and Blood will probably miss things here and there if it's, say, a hero that you're not overly familiar with. So at the same time, in your route to master these skills, having these cards is a substantial help. So for instance, Tunic. Tunic works in two ways. It is a highly efficient card. And in Flesh and Blood, being able to utilize your cards in the most effective and efficient manner is really the big objective. The game is a war of attrition. But to the same degree, it is also a great handicap for learning the game. The fact that its activation is simply waiting to then have a floating resource is a significant help to new players, right? If they mess up their resource use, if they mess up their deck construction, this is a lifeline that they can latch onto. Having these highly efficient cards allow new players to play sloppily, right? So having what could be cited as a 20% increase to their win rate as a new player is significant. So while you can say to them, work on the game, work on the technique, at the same time, these cards are a quicker and easily achieved way to actually meet the level of competitive play that they're trying to achieve. From everything I've seen and read and got from feedback on both sides of the coin, I would very much view it as sort of this mentality. If two people of equal skill were to play each other, the one with the more efficient cards is going to win. They're going to have the edge. At the same time, if someone without any huge level of skill in the game has these highly efficient cards, they now have a fighting chance against someone who is highly skilled but does not have these cards. And to that end, saying to someone who is struggling to acquire these cards, work on your skill, or someone who has a high cost deck to get XYZ card, is going about it the wrong way. Because it is, whether you like it or not, whether you think these cards are a real necessity, it is a mix of both skill and having the best cards out there. The level of strategy needed for Flesh and Blood makes it so that having highly efficient cards matters a lot more than other games where you could have said win condition. So to that degree, what this article goes over is really, really useful. So if you are struggling with the game in terms of finance at the very least, or acquiring these necessary staples, this article makes a very good point of saying, split it up, right? If you go into it with the mentality of you want the best deck, you've already lost. I think just trying to copy someone's deck is a bad shortcut when it comes to Flesh and Blood. I think piecing together your deck and actually understanding what every card does and what is its rationale for being there is such a great way to learn the game. Thinking that every dash runs Teklo Foundry Heart without actually understanding why is in itself a handicap. So to that end, what this article suggests is that you don't go out and you grab all the cards you need, right? You work in the expensive staple cards for whatever hero you're playing as you progress, as you have the financial means, but also as you develop the skill to actually utilize them. And I think that is probably the best mentality to have at the moment when it comes to Flesh and Blood, is that you need to progress with both aspects in mind, right? It's not just about getting good at the game, it's about getting good at the game while also utilizing the best cards in the game. Understanding how Command & Conquer changes your whole deck construction and the way you play said deck is significant. It's not just about tacking on Command & Conquer to your deck because it has such a strong effect, but understanding what it means for your deck that really matters. Flesh and Blood is a highly strategic game, and playing matters, but playing with certain cards also matter. Simply put, the truth is, even with the best deck in the world, if you don't have the skill to utilize it, you'll lose. Yet at the same time, if you have all the skill in the world, you're not going to instantly win every game without the most important cards or the most efficient cards. And that's what these staples are at the moment, and that is why Flesh and Blood has this high price tag.